Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lean Catalyst. My name is Damon Baker, and I'm the CEO of Lean Focus. And in a minute, I will introduce you to today's esteemed guest. In this dynamic monthly 1 hour interview series, we bring together like minded CEOs and leaders who've successfully embraced lean thinking to drive exceptional results. Through our captivating conversations, we'll dive into their remarkable achievements, uncovering the strategies, insights, and practical wisdom that have propelled their organizations forward. Each series is going to feature an in-depth interview with a distinguished CEO who has demonstrated extraordinary leadership while leveraging lean principles. And it's a great opportunity for us to share experiences, strategies, and valuable knowledge that others can apply to their own leadership journeys. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's guest, Joe Vorih. Hello, Joe.
Damon, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you again. So we'll give you a
Good to see you
little
as well.
background on Joe here. So Joe is the CEO of Genuit Group, which is a UK-based publicly traded company which is on the version of the S&P 500 UK stock exchange, the FTSE 250. And Joe, prior to Genuit Group, was with Spectrus as well, another publicly traded company, and was a standalone division platform president within the group from January of 2019, when he joined in 2016. So he left in 2019. Prior to Spectrus, he worked for Clarcor Corporation, a New York Stock Exchange listed business that specializes in filtration solutions. And before that, worked for Danaher Corporation, which is a large medical device company, about 34 billion in sales, also publicly traded. And a little bit about his educational background. Joe has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from MIT and an MBA from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and resides in the UK. Does that sound about right?
That's about right. And we tried to pick the trickiest things for you to have to say there. So
Yeah, I had to
yeah, no
look up
problem. That's
Rensselaer and how to pronounce that.
yeah. I'm sure as we get through, we'll probably talk about the private equity piece in there, which was sort of the lead in. How was that transition and an important one I think we'll talk about it. We talk about lean and cultural impact. So
For sure. So
yeah,
for
generally
those,
that was good. Yeah.
thank you. For those of you that don't know you, Joe, can you give us just a brief tidbit, maybe something that people don't know about you that you think's interesting or unique?
Well, I mean, we're all, it's easy to be self-impressed with what makes you unique, but probably the people who don't know me would be probably surprised to know that I actually grew up in Italy and moved there when I was 8, lived there till I was 18. So I'm really almost as much Italian as I am American in a lot of ways. And it was pretty formative because this might not be logical, but anyone who speaks fluent Italian always draws the crazy international assignments like, you speak Italian, why don't you go start up a plant in China? Logical, I know,
Yeah,
but
yeah, right.
it
Yeah.
really did. It set me up well for a great global career. So it was a lot of fun. Growing up outside Rome was fantastic. So
Yeah. And I never knew that about you either. So that is a
there
fun,
you go.
interesting
Well,
tidbit.
something new every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So for those that don't know what Genuit Group is and does, can you give us a brief description about the company that you're leading?
Sure. Happy to. Yeah. So Genuine, as you said, we're a FTSE 250 business. So that's sort of a mid-cap company. And what we do, our purpose, actually, our purpose statement is that together we create sustainable living. And I joined because this is a company where we are really fundamentally building solutions for the built environment. That's, housing, offices, any kind of construction, but addressing the issues of the energy transition, of climate change, of climate adaptation. So we've got a stormwater management business, blue green roof business. We help the transition of houses to better ventilation and carbon-free heating, low carbon solutions. And we have a more traditional, what you'd think of as sort of a plastic plumbing business, but we're actually switching that over to increasingly recycled content. So everything we do is fundamentally about driving growth through fixing climate problems that are essentially key to what we do. Because the one thing that's not changing is climate change.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a very noble cause and definitely an area of industry that's just completely shifting and very dynamic, I would imagine, regulatory
Absolutely.
challenges and those kinds of
Hmm.
things.
which makes it fun, right? And lots of challenges to go solve.
100%. So talk to us about, so set the stage about your lean journey. So
Yeah.
take us backwards in time, get into the 1984 DeLorean. What was the very first
Mhm.
experience you had with continuous improvement? Maybe it wasn't even called lean back then.
No,
Um,
definitely not. I was thinking about this, Damon. I was reflecting, and I was getting ready for this, and I thought, what was it? And actually, the answer is even before I started work, I was in a graduate class. I don't even remember the name of it, but myself and another guy, Ed Constantine, he and I were actually graduate student buddies, and we were sitting in this class, and it was about JIT, because that's what people were calling it back then, just-in-time
yeah, for
manufacturing. We
sure.
studied a bit about Toyota, and we both thought that was really, really cool. And when we graduated, we both ended up going to work for this pretty unheard of company called Jake Brake at the time. This was for me, it was in March of 1990. And, Danaher was really unheard of. It was about 3 or 4 year old company at the time, all industrial. There's well before life sciences came along for Danaher. And I joined Jake Brake. Well, primarily because I thought it'd be really cool to learn lean. And I met this guy, George Koenigsegger, who was the CEO, and he was actually interviewing fresh out of school engineers like me, and he said he wanted to hire monolithic engineers. I'm not joking. That was actually
What
what he
does
said.
monolithic engineer mean?
He actually gave you a card. He says, I want to hire. What he really meant was, and this was, I think, incredibly thoughtful, uh, was he wanted engineers and people to join the company who would be comfortable in design engineering and supply chain and lean thinking and manufacturing engineering. So it was kind of a rotational program, if you will, except, Jake was a little company. It was a $50 million business at the time with, a few hundred people in Connecticut, and a lot of foresight. And, some of your other guests have mentioned, I think, George's role. I know Stan knows George. And it was important because George was, of course, the guy who really got the lean journey started at Jake Brake. And then that was the nexus for Danaher. So I joined and became one of these monolithic engineers. And the first thing I did was actually go and work in the Caterpillar cell, which was the very first one-piece flow cell we put together at Jake Brake. Now it had been put together shortly before I got there, but here I am, a young, wet behind the ears, new out of college engineer, really focusing on trying to improve and make run a lean cell. So, and again, we're calling it one piece flow, we're calling it just-in-time manufacturing, but it was a great experience, and I got to learn like how to work with the guys in the union and how to get people to make change and how we could improve and measure those improvements. So quite literally, I've been doing this from before day zero of my career,
Yeah.
and that was really important. So a few years later, I actually became, as far as I know, perhaps even the first full time. We called them Kaizen coordinators. Now we call them DBSLs, right? In Danaher. And so I actually, for 2 years, facilitated Kaizens with Shingijutsu, taught lean myself, did 5S classes, actually translated with another engineer, the 5S manual that we got from Toyota, and created the Danaher 5S manual. So it was great fun. And we made a lot of progress because during that first sort of 4 or 5 years of Jake Brake from 1990 until sort of 96 or so, Jake went from about a $50 million business to about a $200 million business. The average selling price of the product went down by about half as they switched from aftermarket to OEM. It cleared out the factory, half the factory, and then filled it back up twice. I mean, it was just an incredibly challenging period. And of course, as I think it was mentioned in one of your panels before, this was actually a UAW shop
Yeah.
in a time when the United Auto Workers still had a fair amount of sway, and so there was a lot we had to do. And even though I was, an engineer and then an ops manager and then an engineering manager, I mean, it was a really great experience. And that was my beginning in lean.
I,
Then I,
I
as you said, went to a couple other Danaher companies and kept going for the rest of my career. So,
I think it's possible. So, George talked about very first time he got Shingijutsu convinced to help Jake Brake.
mhm.
They said, we'll help you, but we need to go there like right now. It was like I can't remember what day of the week it was, but it was in the evening, and they're like, let's go look at the factory. and they pointed out the waste and the lack of flow and the batching and the disconnected processes, and they said we need to move this right now, like right now.
Hmm.
Get the forklifts, let's move the stuff
Yeah.
together, and the first quote unquote U-shaped cell was created in an evening and in a morning, if you will. So
Yeah.
it might be possible that you worked in the first cell
It
ever created in Danaher ever.
it probably was, as far as I know. I mean, that was a long time ago, but that was the year that was most of that happened in sort of 88, 89. So I mean, it was literally within that first 12 months or so. It was exciting. And
And
there was still a whole lot of the business that we hadn't switched over to one piece flow and U-shaped cells at the time. So
for
a lot more
sure.
to do. Yeah.
How much were you aware of, like, the external pressure in the competitive environment and the financial challenges that Jake Break was going on at the time when you said, yes, I will take this job right out of college? Were you aware of that going in? Full awareness, or?
No, no. Before I went in, no. I mean, I was a young engineer, and I was the job was a good fit for me. And George was incredibly charismatic leader. And he did a great job of selling me on the upside of the journey, right? But the good thing too is that he and then his successor, Greg Davies, were pretty transparent. And Bob Putnam was during that time too. So the early leaders were in the spirit that really became a hallmark of the lean culture. They're quite transparent as we went through about what our challenges were, what we need to do to disrupt competition, and also everybody did become aware pretty quickly, and that was very motivating for everybody because we just knew we had to fix it. So
For sure. And you said that you went on to other Danaher businesses after
yeah.
Jake Break. What were some of those
Mhm.
businesses, and what were some of the things you were
I
doing
spent
there?
about 8 years at Jake Break, and interestingly, the last 3 or 4 years, I went back. Well, I went into R&D and worked on accelerated product development and toll gate systems, and it was when we were at that time. Lean was really the tool set that it was actually the Danaher production system initially. Then it
Hmm.
became the Danaher business system, and we started to recognize that other things mattered. About 3 or 4 years in, we started doing value stream mapping, and then a couple of years in, probably I don't know, mid '90s, we started doing ocean economy and policy deployment. And so in that was actually it was actually in the engineering role that I started using policy deployment. Uh, so that was helpful. Then I went into Veeder-Root, and I was in a marketing role in Veeder-Root, but still stayed involved and went to Altoona and did Kaizens, used some of the lean tools as we were thinking about how to release new products and services in Veeder-Root. From there, I went to the Danaher Motion business, which was a new platform. Did M&A for a bit, uh, and that was probably 2 years where I didn't do too much with lean, except that as we were thinking, this was right about the same time that Danaher switched from a bunch of different businesses to platforms. And Danaher Motion was one of the first platforms. And the idea of a growth platform became very much let's build up a really good standard of work on how to buy companies. And we did actually. Uh, so we had a really good funnel process. And looking back, I mean, I thought it was really significant, but now we talk all the time about using lean much beyond just the shop floor and using it in everything we do. So the idea that you could actually use lean principles to apply to how to cultivate, have a big funnel, have stage gates in your M&A process, probably pretty bold thinking back at the time, although we were just doing the job, right? We acquired several companies, and I then went to run part of one of the businesses that we acquired. And again, we acquired a company called Thompson Industries that had done nothing on lean. So we got that started in the journey. Did that for 2 years, and then I ran Dover, which was a really interesting experience. That was a capital equipment business, and the whole premise of that job was to come in and help not to lose the number one customer that was angry with us because we were late. And by the way, they were 3/4 of the business.
No
So
pressure.
yeah, no pressure there, right? So this was like 14 years in, and quite literally in the space of about 8 months, we went from several months of past due and having this small public company on the ropes because just about everything they shipped, they made large semiconductor capital equipment on these motion platforms that we created. These motion platforms were, a couple $100,000 a piece. So these were big 25-ton pieces of equipment. We needed to ship several a month. and we were several months behind in orders. I mean, this was not good. So we actually, got help from some other Danaher companies, as we often did. And we did a value stream map on that. And we said, look, we got to get this product line. Over the pace of 8 months, we cleared the backlog. We actually put in one piece flow for this capital equipment assembly. And once we built a machine, we figured out that we could move it around on air pads. So we could, build a machine to move it into the assembly station, then we could move it into the test station, then move it into the pack station. And sounds crazy, but we did. We cleared the backlog and got one of those great compliments you get from customers. This was a very prickly customer, but 8 months later, the CEO of the company, who had spent a lot of time, going up one side and down the other earlier when I first joined, about how terrible a supplier we were, he came up to me and quite simply says, "Joe, I have to tell you, you guys no longer suck." So
yeah.
You'd have to know the guy at the time, but it was a hell of a compliment.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show, it was one of the first times I really realized the power of using lean and those lean principles and one piece flow, and that simple value stream mapping thinking could apply to anything.
Was that like the moment in time, Joe, that like crystallized in your mind that like almost like people say they kind of like find religion as like there's no other way to run a business?
Yeah.
Like was that a part of the time, or did it happen earlier than that?
No, that was the time, because the thing is, and you've had a few guests on who kind of grew up or knew Danaher. At least certainly this was the case for me. When you grow up in the middle of something, you don't really fully appreciate it until you then try to recreate it in a place where it didn't happen. And Dover was a pretty new acquisition. I'd only been in the company about a month, a year and a half, and there was a massive challenge. And we said, well, let's get the playbook out. And seeing that breakthrough to me was when I realized that everything I'd learned for the last 10 or 12 years was just never going to leave me. And it was probably after that I started, every time I would teach, new leaders lean, which I still do, I often start by saying, look, guys, I got to apologize to you. I'm going to mess up the rest of your life, because you're never going to never going to go through airport security the same again. You're never going to watch a car wash and think
order a sandwich the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be frustrated for life now. But on the other hand, you're going to be a better leader. So let's go.
Yeah.
So that was a key moment for me, certainly as in a leadership role. Yeah.
Yeah, I oftentimes found myself in the beginning of my career almost doubting some of these things. Like, does one place flow really make sense? And like, if I put these things together, like, and it's like time after time, you just start doing this, and you're like, these are bedrock principles, and then you just learn to trust them, and then you make this other mental leap, which you talked about earlier, which is waste elimination and flow applied to non-manufacturing processes. And again, you find that the principles hold true there as well. And then at some point in your career, you're just like, look, there's no way you should run a business other than this way. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, and I kind of alluded to this too, is that, certainly in my experience, and if I think back to the Danaher journey, which, now in retrospect looks just like incredibly brilliant, but, we messed up a lot of things along the way. There were plenty of early Kaizens and Danaher that weren't aligned right.
Those case studies don't get written.
Deployment. Yeah, there were a lot of mistakes, and there were companies, and some of your other guests have mentioned this, there were companies that slipped backwards, maybe the leadership changed and had to come up. So, man, we made so many mistakes along the way. And, but I would say that, by that sort of early 2000s timeframe, we had strategy deployment. We realized what it was. This was right about the same time that Larry, took over from George Sherman. And I think he was instrumental in really driving that hard. And Danaher started to really train incoming leaders, which was another really critical piece.
Yeah.
And it's something that is I realized at that time too, is that if you didn't make sure that your leadership team, whatever you're leading, whether it's just an opco, whether it's a platform or whether it's, a public company, you didn't get your leadership team, that extended leadership team aligned, you just can't do it yourself. So
yeah. I think it's important to be purposeful about creating those formative career experiences especially for new people coming into the organization from the outside at senior levels, because they have baggage. Like they have a lot of things that have to be unlearned, not only technically, that those is important, but I think more on the soft side, like how you manage people, how you engage with the customer, going and
Mhm.
seeing for yourself. A lot of those things are just not natural to humans in general, let alone
Yeah.
in business. So
No,
those
that's right.
learned behaviors, unless you create those experiences and systems to do that, you risk culture dilution over time. And since Danaher is such a highly acquisitive company, every time they buy a new business and you add 10,000 people to the mix, how do you onboard and immerse them into this way of thinking? Because if you don't do that, the acquisition won't pay off.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of us do it on a smaller scale, but we acquire companies and it may be 50 people or 100 people or 200 people, but to me that sort of the cultural foundation of your company, which at least for me is always going to include sort of openness, encouraging people to speak up, get to the root cause with data, and creating that kind of safe environment where it's okay to go and learn from failing along the way. When you describe it like that, that sounds like any good culture, but it also sounds very much like the fundamentals of a lean culture,
Yeah.
right? In a lean business. And that's really important. When you get that done, and then you can teach people some of show, and this is something that we've just been doing here at Genuit even is making the basics of lean simple enough that everybody can kind of see that, what, it is fundamentally about engagement. It's about getting all, in our case, 3,250 people, get every single one of their minds in the game. Let
Yeah.
them empower them, give them the tools to make their job better every day, to make their workplace safer, to fundamentally figure out how to delight their customers. When you kind of start thinking about it that way, it's really easy to get most
Yeah.
leaders involved and engaged and committed.
Yeah. It doesn't do a whole lot of good if it resides in the heads and in the hands of only a handful of people in the organization. So you really need to democratize lean in order to be successful.
Yeah. I'd go further, David. I'd say that if you don't do that, it's going to fail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And
So
there's just an incredible number of companies that have started lean and never really kind of turned the corner or gone over the top of the hill down to the other side.
yeah. So
Okay.
how many years were you at Danaher total?
16.
So
16 years
so,
at Danaher. Yeah.
so you're
Yeah.
16 years in this like-minded environment,
Hmm.
like the tools, the systems, it's like a warm fuzzy nest.
Yep.
You decide to leave. You carry all
Yeah.
this knowledge with you to go to your next role, which was what was
Well,
it?
it was actually Stanadyne, which was a private equity backed diesel fuel injection company. And,
Okay.
and it became Clarkor later because we sold the filter business that I was running to Clarkor. So that was really a 10-year chapter. And like all private equity deals, it was supposed to be a 3-year, three to
Yeah.
5 year thing. But 2009 happened and it wasn't a good time to sell the company. So we doubled down, focused on growth, and took it through another round. But yeah, I
So
left the warm fuzzy nest, went to a private equity company, and basically, found myself lost in the woods. This company that had done nothing on lean, and there weren't very many people there doing it. And I thought to myself, wow, we got to start somewhere because it was strange to me. All of a sudden, there was no support. No, that was the next stage of the journey.
yeah. So what was that like? What challenges did you encounter? Did people look at
Well,
you like you're crazy? Like what are all these words and phrases and what's this guy doing? Why
so
is he asking me questions like this?
well, the first thing is, when you're running a part of a business and we're running the business, and then you're running a platform of businesses and a group, your scope is a bit different, right? I was actually running part of the business. It was all the international operations. So I had a plant in Italy that had lost money for 10 years, and they used to send cash, and I had a plant in India that had caused a $10 million warranty problem at the time and was losing money. And then my CEO had called me up and said, "Hey, listen, it's really great you're joining. By the way, you got to go over there and fix that problem." Then he called 3 weeks later and says, "Oh yeah, you got to go there. I think that might be your bigger priority." Then 3 weeks after that, he called up and said, "Yeah, and Cummins, one of our biggest customers, decided they want to start a plant in China, and they'd like us to start a plant in China. So that'll be yours too." So what for me, because that was my scope, I went and looked at these two particularly the two plants that already existed that were having a ton of trouble. And that was it. Okay, we need to fix the problem. So what do? You use the tools you have, right? And I remember really clearly when I got to Italy the first time and walked around, and the plant was, I mean, it was not a great plant, but there were good people. They had good products. They were trying to do a good job, but it had been underinvested, a bit neglected, and there wasn't any kind of lean thinking there. And they wanted to invest $2 million in a brand new cell to increase the capacity for their key customer. Let's go take a look. Let's go to Gemba. Let's go look at the cell, right? So we walked around the cell, and there was a couple of machines sitting in the middle of the cell not running. And I said, "What's with these machines? Oh, those are dead." But they're in the the operators are walking.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
had
yeah.
pulled the cell together, but the operators literally are walking around
One.
big dead grinders. It's okay. And we did a little bit of, this. What do you need? We tried to get the basic of takt time. And they needed to have something. Let's say it was a 25% increase in capacity, and we just sat there and watched the cell for about an hour, and it was pretty clear right up front that the actual cycle times and the work that was being done could accommodate that. So I said, "Tell you what, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks, and I'm going to bring a lean person." And I found a lean sensei, and he came over, and I kind of kicked it off with him. And the managing director at the time wasn't really interested in, well, didn't understand, and but we just got to fix this. So tell you what, at the end of this week, if we can't fix this problem, I'll sign off the capital request for the $2 million, right? But if we can't fix this problem, then we're going to do it this way instead. And by the end of the week, they had relayed out the cell and gotten the dead machines out, balanced the workload in the cell, figured out they could get it done with 3 operators instead of 4, and they didn't need any. But they needed about $100,000 to redo 1 or 2 machines just to make the operations a little simpler. So that sounds good. They said simulated. They had actually gotten the first and the third operator kind of job working in the work balance, but the one in the middle was tough. There was a transition in there, and it was difficult, and they were used to batching. And he said, "I really think it'd be great," the lean sensei that said, "if one of you could run that operation up." I'm the VP Global Operations, right? If one of you could run the operation, I think it'd go a long way towards showing the operators that you guys care and that it'll work. And so the operations director didn't want to do it. The managing director didn't want to do it. So I did it. I said, "Well, take me." We went down to the tool crib. I got a Standardine t-shirt from the operators thing, had my jeans on, and I ran that cell. I ran the middle job of that cell for about 3 hours until I hit the takt time. And for the next 6 years that I had that responsibility plant, the guy who did that operation used to come out beaming to me every single time I walked by that cell and show me the progress they'd made. I mean, it was one of those things where you just have to be willing as a leader to get your hands dirty and show how it works. So for me, that was a real key breakthrough, because this is, Italy's not an easy place to make these kinds of changes. I had the advantage of speaking Italian, of course, but still, we made progress pretty quickly there.
Where did that
And
come
we,
from, Joe? Like that humility and willingness to jump in like that. Was that a learned behavior? Did you, like, growing up, did your parents instill that in you? Did you learn it at MIT? Did you get it at Danaher? Like, can you,
you don't learn that stuff at MIT, I'm sure.
yeah, were you just like
No,
born that way? Like, because to me, that's one of
I,
the, as I asked because it's a really important trait that really
yeah.
defines what a lean leader is. So where is that behavior learned?
The good news is, look, it is a learned behavior. I mean, honestly, I mean, that's not the kind of things they teach you at grade schools. If anything, they almost teach you the opposite, right?
Right. Look at the
But
spreadsheet.
for me, there was always a curiosity, and I was always kind of, as a kid, pretty outdoorsy and happy to be hands on. And my dad was an engineer, so we were always tinkering with things. I mean, I was always comfortable putting my hands on things, but that willingness to go out and do things, I actually think comes from seeing things. You have to fail to appreciate that, and then you see the value of making that connection with people. And once you've done that and you've been hands on, and I think that came through some of the hands on work at Danaher. being in Kaizens and seeing, whether it's a president's Kaizen or whatever, but seeing people at all levels in the organization all be, kind of shoulder to shoulder working together.
Yeah.
Once you've seen that, you kind of realize just how powerful that is. So to me, I think that's probably where it came from. I do think it's an important trait, but it's a learned trait and it's something you can learn.
Well, to me, there's a humility aspect ingredient in there as well, because as you told the story, you talked about two levels of leadership that were unwilling to step into that.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes that unwillingness is rooted in like, this is below my job title or
Yeah,
my pay
exactly.
grade kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like this class system. Like I'm better and more important than you, so you won't see me out there. That's somebody else's job, right? And it skipped two levels to the guy who they're looking up at and going, geez, wow,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh. And to me, that's a moment in time that really crystallizes the
Yeah,
culture that you're trying to build when they see
that's
that.
right.
And one of two
That's
things is
exactly
going
right.
to happen. They're going to think, wow, like if Joe does it, I can do it. Or they're going to think, well, that's never going to be me. And over time, you're probably going to root those people out of your organization would be what typically
Mm-hmm.
happens. So
Yeah, I mean, those other two guys didn't work there that much longer, but I sat down and talked to them, and had a good chance. But some people just grow up in a culture where that sort of hierarchy, and I have to be honest with you, I don't see much of that anymore. I mean, it used to be a bigger issue, but whether it's the types of cultures and the people I like to surround myself with, or a bit of an improvement in perhaps a less hierarchical approach to management than was probably the case 30 or 40 years ago. Uh,
yeah,
it will kill a lean transformation. The minute you say, "No, I'm not going to do that," people are like, "Well, I guess this, isn't really serious." And one of the most important lessons you can learn is that the CEO is willing to do something. Just about anybody can find themselves willing to do it usually. So
yeah, 100%.
yeah, it's
So
a, it's a good lesson. Yeah.
so I think that's a good segue into what it means to be a lean CEO. So if you were to design the perfect job description with competencies and characteristics and traits for a lean CEO, and just think in general, maybe not the size of the business or the type of the
Yeah.
business at this point, what are
Mhm.
the types of character traits and things that you think define a great lean CEO?
Well, it's interesting. I actually think in terms of sort of the personality side, I've seen everything from highly energetic people. A lot of people know me. I'm kind of high on the energy side, but I've met some very quiet and effective lean CEOs, so it's not that. But you definitely have to be willing to bring people along. You got to be willing to be something you've said many times, Damon. You got to be willing to teach yourself. We just talked about you got to be willing to do yourself because that is part of leading. And if you think about a CEO's job, I like to think about simply as sort of strategy, people, and performance, right? And your job as a CEO is to make sure that the strategy of the company is right. And one of the things I've always tried to do is kind of embed creating a lean operating system, building a really good culture for the company as part of the strategy, because that is really the how of the strategy. And on the people side, the more you invest in people, the more you realize you've got to bring them along. You give people the opportunity, and depending on where you're operating, whether it's 15 years ago in China where it was very hard to find that many people with lean experience, or in some countries in Europe, I've found it a lot harder to find people already come in with that experience. You've got to give the chance for people. You got to create that environment, that learning environment where everybody from the shop floor to your executive team gets a chance to learn. And then on the performance side is you start putting in place the measurements, right? The focus, which is really important on the vital few, through strategy deployment, through your operating review system, and that leadership standard work. And so when you have those three things, you've got a real clear vision of what you're trying to do. And somehow you've made sure that having a lean culture and the kind of culture that actually facilitates lean thinking. So the transparency, the safe place, it's okay to fail. We're going to, win or learn, right? That kind of culture. And then you've got the people, that sort of relentless, everybody, we can help everybody become better, but we also try to get that critical mass of people who either came in with that experience or get that experience there, so that, you're not doing it alone. And then you put the systems in place to keep you focused, so that when you do make mistakes, which you inevitably will, you realize them quickly. Data brings you back. You solve problems at the root cause. You improve your leadership standard work at every level. And that's sort of that triumvirate that I think you've got to have. I don't think you have to be necessarily super energetic. Like I said, I've seen quiet people do it, but you got to have those three pieces to make this work, I think. My view.
So building on that, if somebody just listened to that description and maybe it didn't have all the formative experiences that you had through Danaher and other places and things like that,
Mhm.
but they have a willingness to try and learn at this phase of their career, they've got the CEO title. How do
Yeah.
they get, how would you advise somebody like that in that situation to get started on that journey where they are willing to do it, but they don't know how to do it?
Yeah. Look, I actually had that exact experience. I worked not that long ago for a CEO said to me, he says, look, I've seen some great examples of lean businesses. I've seen them in other places. I personally don't really have that experience, but I believe that it's important. So tell me what to do. And he had the humility to say, look, I want to make this part of my legacy, but I need people like you to help us guide there. And so we started down that path of, we found actually, we started with you guys actually, but we found a critical mass of people who knew had the deep experience outside that we could get started with, because you need that, right? Because if you're starting from a standing stop, you just by definition don't have enough people inside to do it. So you're going to have to find some outside help, and whether it's Jiu-Jitsu or Lean Focus or whoever. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who can help you get started. In my case, I always want to make sure that I know that the people who are going to help us know what good looks like in my mind. This
Yeah.
is really important. Is I've also seen that not work. The second thing you got to do is you got to go build the coalition of the willing inside the company. And for me, that's usually about not just the executive team, but it's about that extended leadership team. And it's a concept that I've used, 5 times now, where rather than just take my direct reports, just take their direct reports and say, look, you know what, this is going to be the extended leadership team. And it could be, 30 people or so for a smaller company like Omega, to 75 people for a corporation like Genuit, with 3,500 people. And it's really powerful because you get that group together. You say, okay, guys, we're going on this journey together. You start training them, teaching them, giving them exposure to the lighthouses, bring them through an executive champion kind of orientation, and then follow it up with Kaizen commitments. And what's really important is that one CEO can't really touch 3,500 people, and 7 executive members can. But
Yeah.
75 leaders, you're pretty close. I mean, you're now down to probably 2 levels or so to everybody in the organization, and that's the force multiplier. So that's that coalition of the willing. So when you get that kind of going, and you build the capabilities inside, you get some outside help, and you build this kind of extended leadership team. To me, those are really critical. And
Yeah.
then the CEO has got to learn on that journey. If the CEO doesn't know, he or she has got to commit to being part of this and being hands-on and going to the Kaizens and be willing to be a bit vulnerable and make some mistakes along the way, and being seen to be absolutely at the front of this journey too. So, you can do it, but
Yeah.
it's not going to be easy.
What amazes me is, especially now, it's like there's hundreds, if not thousands, of books written on this.
Yeah.
There's case study after case study showing how this works. There's great companies that you can go learn from that are willing to open their doors, and CEOs are willing to talk about everything that you just talked about. Yet, in spite of all of that availability, that knowledge, there is still a large dearth, if you will, of CEOs unwilling to even try. So what do you think is the reason or reasons behind that unwillingness to either get started, or maybe they get started but like they're not really into it. It's kind of like the
Yeah.
old chicken and the pig commitment level. It's like the
Hmm.
chicken is not as
Yeah.
committed as the pig.
Chicken's involved in breakfast, the
Yeah,
pig is committed,
exactly.
right?
So why
You
is
know,
that?
I think about that a lot actually, because to me, and you'll probably relate to this, for us, it's probably hard to imagine a world where you wouldn't do that. But there's a lot of people who have never had this experience, who've never actually seen the penny drop in their business. Had that moment that we talked about at Dover, for me, where I was like, wow, this actually solved a massive problem that was threatening to take down the company, right? And it got everybody fired up and involved. And, so I think that's part of the problem, right? And if you go get an MBA, they're not going to tell you that this is key to transforming the business. They're going to give you all kinds of other great things. And now it's going to be about AI and all of, I mean, it's all interesting and it's good, but somehow
Silver
this
bullet
is,
stuff.
yeah, this is the I think it's the most underappreciated thing you can do to really mark your time as a successful CEO. But every time I start this journey to company, I've got to convince people to work for me who have never done it, who don't know how that works. So, it's out there. I mean, there's a lot of people still today who don't really get it. And the people who have read about it think, well, this is something you do in automotive businesses and, it works for cars, right? But, but between us and others, I mean, I've done it. I've done it for, we're doing it for building materials now. I've done it on data acquisition systems that are thousands of channels. We've done it on, aircraft engine parts. We've done it in automotive. We've done it in, leak detection systems for tanks. I mean, look, it's being done in healthcare. I mean, if you can do it, if you can do lean in emergency room, you can probably do it anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I do think that there's still isn't, there just aren't enough people who've actually seen it themselves, and that's what we've got to do. We've just got to keep spreading the word, right? And give people a chance to learn hands on.
Do you think that success has something to do with it? Like the hubris born from success specifically, like when you are quote unquote a successful company and you're growing and you're
Yeah,
profitable, there's less of
sure.
an internal desire to change things the way they are because you believe that if you do so, you may upset the status quo.
I think it's a great point. Right? I mean, especially, yeah, especially if there isn't a crisis or a reason to change. Right? We often talk about a burning platform, and I think good leaders, if they kind of know what needs to be done, they'll often create a burning platform. Never waste a good crisis, right?
Yeah,
But it's definitely part of it, right? I mean, if what you've done so far has gotten you a degree of success, you're very unlikely to change. And what's really interesting about leaders with that lean mindset is that you almost become the opposite. You almost
paranoid.
assume that if you haven't changed, you're probably
Yeah,
missing something,
yeah.
and if a
Constructive
process
paranoia.
hasn't been, that's right. If something hasn't changed, then your competition is probably lapping you.
So,
So
I'm curious in your insight. So you've worked for several publicly traded companies
mhm.
as the P&L leader, the CEO. There's also external pressures. So how do you keep the barbarians at the gate at bay while taking your organization on this journey that's cultural, it's long term, it's constancy of purpose, when the outside world might want to know, like, how are you pursuing some of these things like AI and all these sort of things that might disrupt what you're trying to do, because lean is sort of a long-term payoff strategy and it's not
Hmm.
sexy.
Hmm.
And to the outsiders it can seem boring and sort of technical. And so how do you satisfy those stakeholders as a CEO? Because you have to, because that's part of the
You
job,
do,
right?
you do. So, well, all I can, as a, I can tell you what we are doing at Genuit. That is that when we set out, when we studied, well, we did a big piece of analysis, right? We took a good look at what the company was good at and what we thought the opportunity was in front of us. We laid out a new strategy, and we tried to simplify that strategy to communicate internally and externally, by the way. Because oftentimes the most complicated strategy is what you sit around and talk about as a management team with tons of PowerPoint, and then you show to the board a bit of a simpler version. But when you go outside to investors and you go inside to the people who work in the company, you want to get it really as clear and as repeatable and as focused as possible. And so for us, it was really these four things. And I mentioned not because it's necessarily right and it's not formulaic, but because you have to keep educating people internally and externally about what you're doing and the timeframes for that. But in our case, we did have a bit of a burning platform that got created with a bit of a downturn in the industry. So look, we had to take some tough decisions, but we were quite clear that we had to get rid of some extra sites. We had to do a few things like that, which were clear, quick responses to the market. But then we were very clear that we were going to build a culture and a business and a continuous improvement system with this lean journey that was going to make it so that we would continually improve in the future. So we had to kind of separate a quick reaction from then beginning the journey, right? And then we also talked about what those long-term growth drivers would be for the business and how those would actually start to go forward. So when you talk to investors, investors actually, they want to see results every quarter, or in our case, as a UK company, every half year. But they also, most of them are actually here to make money over multiple years.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you can explain to them and show them examples, you'd say, look, we're taking on this lean journey because, and I remember you and I actually talked about a slide that I actually used. I said, look, typical lean companies see these kinds of productivity improvements. They see these kinds of improvements in return on capital employed. They do this. And so people listen a little bit and they're like, okay, fine, great. I see your strategy. I see this. Now tell me a little more about this because I don't understand that. So then we offered to bring investors to some of our sites to see how it works, right? And that's why we do lighthouse sites, not for the investors. We actually do it for our people. But the beautiful thing is when you have a lighthouse site and you can start to show people improvement, you can say, look, in this site, it's actual example and case, right? This site was able to actually get about a 50% productivity improvement on 4 or 5 of the cells. Imagine if we could get that productivity improvement across the entire Genuit business. And all of a sudden they start going, bing, and the analysts and the investors start realizing that, over time, this is actually going to be the gift that keeps on giving. So we're able to show them pretty clearly, look, there's some stuff we just had to do. We had to get rid of some costs that was kind of holding us back. But probably, honestly, in my view, and I explained this internally and externally, that's probably stuff that should have been done a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So we just got to get it done. Fine. Okay. One time. That's kind of, okay. But now this is the piece that's actually going to make us better every single year going forward and support our ability to execute our long-term growth strategy. So when you as a CEO, one of the things you got to do is you've got to be really good at telling that story and weaving that lean continuous improvement into that story is something I've been doing from literally the day I started at Genuit. So, and now now investors and analysts want to come and see.
Going back to the lean CEO, that's just getting started and learning, if you will. How important is that lean CEO in terms of having a person that they really trust, that can speak to them very candidly and transparently and basically say things like, hey man, like the way you just held that meeting was garbage and here's what you should have done differently on that one, all within the lean business system context and culture, almost like stapled to them like a shadow, if you will. Because I've often described to CEOs as you are in the loneliest job in the world. Why? Because you're at the top of the organization. Generally speaking, you don't get candid feedback from people within your own organization. At least a lot of organizations do. And if you get feedback, it tends to be from outside board and that kind of thing. So you start to convince yourself over time that you must have things figured out and that you must be doing a good job because you're not getting a lot of feedback from within the organization. So how important is that to align yourself with somebody, almost like a coach, personal trainer, or whatever you want to call them, that's helping them on this lean journey?
Yeah. Well, I had 2 thoughts. One is it's really crucial because a mistake that some people make is they have whoever's CEO may decide they're going to do this, and they've got somebody doing this lean journey, but it's delegated like 2 or 3 levels down,
Yeah.
and they just you've said this. I think many of your guests have said this. This isn't something you can delegate. This is something that you have to actually build as part of the company, part of the culture, as part of the leadership systems and all. So you do have to have that person close to you, and they've got to be able to tell you, and you've got to have that relationship they can be honest with. But my second thought was, honestly, good CEOs will surround themselves with that kind of person on their team anyway.
Yeah.
Whether it's their HR person, their CFO. I mean, you need an intelligent, CFO is going to be successful, needs to have that kind of person, period, on their team. So, and that is that characteristic I think you see in a good lean business, where it's absolutely okay to talk about what's wrong and to give each other constructive feedback and to talk about the problems. And we joke about how red's the new green, right? But it is about building a culture where you don't shy away from that. That politics and niceties don't get in the way of having just an honest conversation. It's like, I want you to be successful, and that meeting wasn't cutting it. So let's talk about this. How can we make the next one better?
Yeah.
So that's
we
really
we had
important.
we had one prospective client CEO I was speaking with, and as we're designing sort of the journey and putting a proposal together, part of this was this individual was one of these CEOs that didn't know lean, didn't have experiences and things like that. And I said,
Mhm.
I need to be stapled to you over the course of the next 12 to 18 months to see how you interact in these different forums that you're in, but also in the things that we're going to
Mhm.
put in place, like strategy deployment and daily management and the operating
Yeah.
reviews and these kinds of things. And I said, I need to be able to give you very candid feedback one-on-one about how you're doing, both positive and constructive. And he said to me, he goes, I don't need a drinking buddy. And I said, then this is not going to work. If you don't have enough humility to
Yeah.
recognize that you as a leader need to change the way you lead
Mhm.
in order to drive a lean transformation, this will not work. Pure and simple.
No, I agree. I
I can charge
fundamentally
you a lot of
agree.
money by
Yeah.
doing kaizens. We can do kaizens till the cows come home, but nothing will
Mhm.
change culturally in this business. And they sort of don't understand that. It's like lean seems very transactional to them. Go in and lean out this plant or do this event and hire this CI person for me, but don't change anything about how I behave
Yeah.
as the
Yeah.
CEO. That's a mistake, in my opinion.
Well, look, I agree. I think it's really important, and I've actually got a couple of half-day reviews of our lighthouses that we've been working on here at Genuit, coming up in about a month. And somebody well is going to be there, and he's going to help me understand all the things we didn't get quite right the first time around. And I'm going to be there myself for those 2 half days, because there's things we didn't support, get right, whatever. But that's the learning experience. That's what you got to do, right? And I have no doubt that this guy's going to do a good job of letting me know exactly what I could have done better from a good place. But and I'm going to be listening and taking notes. So I think that's right. That's really important.
Well, great. Well, we're coming up on time, Joe. If you were to give any parting advice to the aspiring lean
Mhm.
CEO learner just getting started, what would you tell him or her?
Well, I think we touched on some of this. I mean, I think the first thing is, look, you definitely can do it, but it's going to require you to change an awful lot about the way you lead. And so if you're willing to make that change, then that's the first step. And then the second thing is, you got this, right? Don't assume that what got you there is going to get you to the next level. The second thing is, you got to find some people who actually have been through it before, who know what good looks like, who can help you see what good looks like, who can teach you and teach your team. And I think the third thing gets back to this piece I was saying about earlier, is you've got to find a way to get that critical leadership mass, because a couple of leaders, at the top of the company aren't going to make a successful lean transformation. All the leaders together will make it successful. And you get to a point where if you've got your executive team on board, committed, and they don't have to have the experience, but they all have to be learning and willing and agree that this is going to be part of what that company is going to be in the future. and then they get their team, and you start getting that critical mass. You actually get to the point where you quit hiring people in and quit promoting people who aren't aligned with that culture. And that's when you get to that critical mass. So look, I mean, we could talk till the cows come home about the tools, but the tools aren't what's going to make it successful. It's the people's commitment to learning, to using, to screwing it up, to then going back and then and continuously improving. Because strategy deployment, it'll be a couple of years until you really get it great. So you have to have that commitment. So I think if you could do those couple of things, then surround yourself by some people who really know the tools, know the system, knows what good looks like, who've actually been in there and done it themselves. I think you'd be all right.
Yeah. Excellent sage wisdom. Appreciate it.
As always. We could probably talk for 2 more hours, but yeah, then we probably get into drinking buddy territory. But no, yeah, it's really important. And I'm happy to do this. Like I said, I went back and took a look at a couple of the others you've done, and just honestly, kind of humbled to be part of this group, and I hope this helps a few people.
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Joe. So
really my pleasure, Damon.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we'll wrap this thing up. Before we bid farewell, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the valuable insights and practical advice that Joe shared today with us and how you can apply these lessons to your own organization's lean journey. If you have any further questions or would like to explore the possibilities of initiating or perhaps rebooting your own lean transformation journey, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Lean Focus. We're here to support you every step of the way. And once again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Joe for sharing his experiences and expertise with us. And we're grateful for his contributions to this interview series. And we hope to see you all next month on another edition of Lean Catalyst. And I wish you all continued success in your own lean transformation journeys. Thank you all. Bye.